time and time again, upwards of 40% of the time, to not be able to recognize the faces of brown people, and which is problematic when we talk about the privacy implications, the law enforcement implications, the impact on people who are new citizens to this country, and their impact. It is a huge issue that has been taken up across the globe. Over 100 organizations actually just sent a letter to President Biden asking for a national ban. There have been cities all across the country that have placed bans on this technology because it is very dangerous. It is a technology that gets it wrong very often, and we have to, in a city that has experienced so much injustice. We've experienced the impact of Freddie Gray, which I would note that there was criticism of the Baltimore Police Department's use of this technology at their First Amendment protected protests in order to push back on that activism, which is a huge issue. And so we feel that it is important that any technology used by private industry or by law enforcement or city government is accurate, is accountable, is transparent. And to date, none of that can describe the use of facial recognition technology in Baltimore City. And I am proud and thankful that the Public Safety Committee just voted last week unanimously to support the moratorium on this. I would also want to mention that we are going to be introducing the creation of a task force on Tuesday, June 8th, to explore the issue further so we can further develop regulations and regulatory oversight over this moving forward, or potentially in a permanent ban. All of those things are on the table. We just want to make sure we get it right, because there's so much at stake for communities of color in Baltimore City, for people in Baltimore City to be able to walk freely, to be able to speak freely, to be able to express their First Amendment rights, and most importantly, to not be incarcerated for a crime they did not commit. And so with that, I want to hand it over to one of our amazing partners in this work. We have representatives here from Organizing Black to say why they support it as well. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Raleek Hayes, Deputy Director of Organizing Black. I think this bill is an important first step when we start thinking about how do we reimagine public safety and move from a mindset that allows us to criminalize and utilize all pieces of technology and things as crime-solving tools. We know that in Baltimore, we've constantly invested in different forms of policing, different technologies, without any type of research or any type of return on our investment. It is just unacceptable, and this is, again, an important first step. We've seen across the country that these technologies are built in with algorithmic bias and racial bias already built into these systems, so set to misidentify Black people. So it is really important that when we start reducing the tools that police have and start reducing the scope of their abilities, we take those funds and those extra resources and reapply them elsewhere to things that we know works, like programs like Out for Justice, Jobs Opportunity Task Force, Safe Streets, mental health services. Those things are the things we know that work, but we give less than 1% of our budget to. The health department is currently, I believe, 80% grant funded, which means only 20% of its funds come from the general fund, while 80% of the police department gets their money from the city, right? So we have to realign our priorities and figure out what safety really means. And so I'm really hopeful that this task force will have deep discussions about how do we reimagine public safety and the role of technology in that. Thank you.
That was the MC. Next up, we have a speaker from CASA.
Buenos días. Hola, mi nombre es Diana y vivo en Baltimore City.
Good morning. Good morning, my name is Diana and I live in Baltimore City.
Soy madre de 2 hijos y he llamado Baltimore mi hogar por los últimos 8 años.
I am a mother of 2 and I've called Baltimore my home for the last 8 years.
Después de emigrar de los Estados Unidos, orgullosamente soy miembro de CASA.
After I immigrated to the United States, I proudly became a member of CASA,
la organización más grande del medio atlántico liderada por sus miembros.
the largest pro-immigrant organization in the Mid-Atlantic led by its members.
Quienes somos inmigrantes y familia de clase trabajadora directamente impactadas.
That is made up of immigrants, working class people who are directly impacted by this type of legislation.
Estoy aquí el día de hoy levantando mi voz por mi familia y mi comunidad inmigrante.
I am here today lifting my voice for my family and my community.
Es importante que nuestra ciudad no invierta fondo en programas cual pueden poner a nuestra comunidad inmigrante en peligro, como el programa de tecnología de reconocimiento facial.
It is important that the city does not invest in technology like the facial recognition software that could be dangerous to our immigrant communities.
Nosotros en la comunidad inmigrante hemos sido testigos de cómo la policía han cometido grandes errores en nuestra ciudad y algunos le han costado la deportación.
We have been witness to the great mistakes that some police officers have made when it comes to the immigrant community, and we cannot allow this kind of technology to continue.
El programa de reconocimiento facial ha tenido muchos errores ya en todo el país, específicamente el reconocimiento de personas afrodescendientes y latinas.
We know that this technology has made great errors, especially when it comes to recognizing the faces of people of color, African Americans, and Latinos.
La ciudad debe enfocarse en no invertir en programas donde no perjudique a las familias latinas, como este.
We don't want the city to invest in programs like this that can be negative for our community.
Deben utilizar esos fondos para mejor implementar el ID municipal.
Instead, they should invest their resources in creating the municipal ID, which would be a benefit for many people in our community.
Y asegurar que nuestra comunidad inmigrante no tenga miedo al presentar un documento que no esté marcado y delate su estatus migratorio.
And that would free our immigrant communities from the fear of presenting a document that might reveal their immigrant status.
Por todas esas razones, alzo mi voz en contra del programa que empujan a nuestra comunidad más en la sombra.
For all these reasons, I am against this type of technology, which would push our communities back into the shadows.
Y les digo a la ciudad que también digan que no.
I'm here to tell Baltimore City to say no.
Gracias. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have a speaker. Make sure I'm getting this right here. 1 second, sorry. Messed up one of the mics. We have a representative from the Baltimore Teachers Union.
Good morning. My name is Corey Gaber, and I'm a middle school English teacher in Baltimore City Public Schools and a vice president on the Baltimore Teachers Union Executive Board. We all care about safety of our city, and in particular the young people who've been most impacted by violence. The question isn't whether we have a shared interest in making our city safer. The question is what will actually make us safer. And I'm here today to say that handing an unproven and unreliable tool to a police department internationally renowned for its unconstitutional abuses is not the answer. I think about one of my former students in Mentees, Montreal, who was pulled over and arrested for the crime of walking to the corner store to get a snack at night while black and wearing a hoodie. He was misidentified and as a result spent 2 weeks locked up away from his family, his home, and his school community. His freedom stripped away until the illegitimate and baseless charges were dropped. We should not compound such tragic interactions by bringing in a technology that studies have found misidentifies black citizens at an alarming rate and overrepresents African Americans in the face recognition repository searched by BPD, in part because they are arrested at a rate close to twice as high as their share of the state population. Instead, we might consider directing our time and resources towards solutions that actually make our young people safer. Frederick Douglass said it's easier to build strong children than to repair broken men. Yet Baltimore City continues to contribute the smallest percentage of its total operating budget to its K-12 public schools by a wide margin. In an FY18 DLS report, the statewide average contribution to public schools as a percentage of the jurisdiction's total operating budget was 36%, while Baltimore was only 14%. And in the preliminary FY22 operating budget, that number goes down to 11.4%. What would have made Montreal safer? A well-resourced educational facility with potable drinking water, fully staffed with ample mental health supports, and a wide array of engaging after-school programs, or a racially biased technology from the dystopian sci-fi movie Minority Report to be used in over-policed and over-surveilled communities. We must halt the use of facial recognition technology and instead give Baltimore City's young people the schools they deserve. Thank you.
And our final speaker before questions is Councilmember Cohen.
Thank you so much for joining us this morning. You've heard from a number of folks across our city about why we have concerns about this technology. And I want to first thank the bill sponsor, Councilman Burnett, for his great leadership, and also my colleagues, Councilman Dorsey, Ramos, all the folks from the Public Safety Committee that passed this bill out of committee. But I also want to really thank Organizing Black, CASA, Progressive Maryland, and the Teachers Union, because right now what we're seeing is folks coming together around a common agenda that promotes actual safety instead of the fantasy of safety. And what I mean by that is, a lot of times we get asked as the city council, why are you focused on a bill like putting a moratorium on facial recognition technology? Well, it's because we know that won't actually keep our communities safe. Like you've heard time and time again today, too many times people, particularly Black people, have been falsely identified with this technology. Right now, in this building, we're having budget hearings. We know that a budget is a presentation of a society's moral agenda. And right now, we're putting far too much into technologies that we don't know work and that will ultimately lead to further mass incarceration of minority communities. Now, what would work? We heard from folks today, our friends from CASA say we need a municipal ID in this city so that undocumented folks or just anybody could show up and get books at the library and get what they need. We heard from Mr. Gaber, who's a teacher, that we need more investment in our schools and in building positive, strong children in our city. We heard from our friends at Organizing Black that one of the stats we learned last night, or maybe the night before, from our health department is that only 20% of their funds are coming from our general fund. That means that 80% of their budget comes from grants, from the federal government, from the state, and that is notoriously unreliable. Our health department is invested in trauma-informed care, the work that I've been championing, in maternal health, in opioid and substance recovery, in such mission-critical work across our city. And we heard yesterday from Councilmember Ramos, who said, you need more money to our housing department, right? We are constantly scrapping to try to get enough funds together to put people in housing during a global pandemic. Those are some of Baltimore's priorities: health, housing, education, support for our immigrant community, participatory budgeting. That's what Baltimore believes in. And so going down this costly rabbit hole, spending money and wasting energy and human life on a technology that we don't even understand, that has shown so many times to be inaccurate, is not a good use of our city's precious funds. And that's why today we urge our colleagues, we urge all of Baltimore to stand united with the folks that are here today and say no to this facial recognition technology, and to say yes to Councilman Burnett's task force that will study it and that will come up with real recommendations on how we can better increase safety. So again, I want to thank everybody for joining us today, and I'm going to pass it back to Councilman Burnett for questions.
Thank you everybody. We'll take questions.
Since the bill has gotten out of committee, has it been changed at all? Does the ban apply or include commercial uses by banks, hospitality industry, retailers, etc.? Are they carve-outs for that?
In a very limited capacity. So the bill does allow for, if you, for example, want to use this to verify that the employee walking in the building is who they are supposed to be, for any sort of like surveillance on the interior part of a building, again, that's okay in this bill. But what we're really concerned about is somebody just walking down the street unbeknowingly being surveilled and identified. It's one thing if you're just walking down Monument Street. It's a different thing if the system, a bank or any other private corporation, Amazon or any other, is now able to identify that Chris Burnett is walking down Monument Street at this particular time on this particular day. We don't know where that information goes. We don't know what database you end up in. We don't know if that information is being sold. And we did ask these questions in the hearing to both the police department and private industry. Who has access to this data? Where does it go? How is it being used? Who is it being sold to? There was a very high profile a piece around Clearview Analytica, which was a company, or Clearview AI, which is a national company that's since been banned in Canada and several other places for scraping publicly available information from social media accounts for people who were not committing crimes, were not involved in anything other than existing and using a social media account, who were now being funneled into these databases and that information being sold and used by law enforcement and other private industry. And so that's why we wanted to make sure that while we do understand if you want to protect your building, whether that's a government building or private building, that's an allowable use in this bill. The public should be able to exist, should be able to walk around without being concerned that they'll end up in some database for just simply walking down the street.
Can you give us a facial recognition technology currently used in the city? How is it currently used?
So the police department uses the Maryland Image Repository System, and as you all may be aware, they're a state agency technically. So this bill does not prohibit the use or access to the Maryland Image Repository System that the police department currently uses, and that's just beyond the scope of what we can do on the city council. Beyond that, we do know that there are private uses already. I mean, doorbells, security systems. I mean, this stuff is starting to proliferate. We even learned of plans to put this in baby monitors and other sort of household technology, which again, on the surface may sound reasonable, but if you think about the fact that maybe you're a plumber or a contractor that's coming to just fix someone's sink, now this baby monitor is logging my face and putting me into a database, of which we know for sure from private industry is being shared with law enforcement. And so your ability to, again, exist without being put into some mysterious place or mysterious database that you don't know where the information's going, don't know what's being sold, don't know who has access to it and how it's being used. If you're misidentified walking in, to someone's house or just walking down the street, that can be life-changing. And we've actually seen across the country, in Detroit, in New York, in a few other states, where there have been misidentifications, where people's lives were turned upside down, incarcerated for months at a time, losing jobs, losing housing, for a software that has been shown time and time again to not be able to get black and brown faces correct. Yep.
Just wanted to briefly add that this does not ban the use of Ring cameras or any sort of personal security cameras, right? That's not what this does. It disallows those from being used for facial recognition technology to be put in the database, but this doesn't mean that folks can't have a Ring or any other personal home security camera to protect their house.
Can you give us a dollar figure of how much is actually being spent to use this software in Baltimore right now?
So it's not clear because the state is currently paying for it it's being paid for at the state level, and so I don't have that dollar amount as to what it costs to run the Maryland Image Repository System, which is what all the law enforcement agencies use.
And I know somebody mentioned the Freddie Gray example. Is there another example in Baltimore City where this misinformation has happened because of the facial recognition software?
Well, and that's the question that we've actually been asking, is are there tracking? So the department has indicated that they use a second, like a human intervention, essentially. So they make identification, then there's a person that looks at it. The challenge is, we've asked how often does the system actually produce false positives. They actually don't track that data, and the state doesn't either. So to answer your question, nobody seems to know how bad it is, which is why we felt it was appropriate to put a pause, which is what this bill does. It's a moratorium that would end in the December 31st of 2022. In that interim, we'll use the task force to ask these questions and try and do a deeper dive into basically be able to say, like, well, maybe it isn't getting as many false positives as we think, or maybe it's getting more than we know about. Because right now there is no public reporting, and there's been efforts at the state level. Senator Charles Sidnor, who's a supporter of this bill and has been trying to take this on at the state level for 6 years now, has been pushing on this exact question of who uses it, how accurate is it appropriate to use it for all types of crimes, trying to scale it back. You know, there's a lot of conversation, and obviously we're very cognizant of the violence in Baltimore and want to see the violence end. But we also know that the police department is under consent decree for a pattern and practice of abuse. And so we don't want to further expose the police department to using technology that could actually roll back the reforms that we know we need at the local level and at the state level.
What other questions is this task force going to be looking to answer, in addition to trying to put a number on how often this misidentification happens?
So we want to know, we want to also figure out a regulatory framework for it. Because again, we can't stop the state from doing what they do, but our anticipation is that if the city does take control of the police department, we want to be able to have more oversight and accountability and transparency, not only for the public, but via the council, but so that they have a better understanding of what goes right, what goes wrong, and from there. And so we just want to have a clearer picture of how the technology works. Is there a appropriate use to expand? Is there not? I mean, there's just so many questions that through this hearing process, and I would know this isn't the first time I put the bill in. It died in committee last time, so we've had a number of hearings on this topic, but there still remains a tremendous amount of questions that even folks who are for the use don't have the answers to, which is why we think it's particularly problematic that if you're a proponent of a technology for whatever purpose, then you should be able to answer basic questions about how it's being stored, how it's being used, is it being shared with law enforcement, how often does it get it right, how often does it get it wrong. And right now those answers have gone they've gone unanswered. Those questions have gone unanswered.
Given you just mentioned the legislative history of the bill, what's your confidence level going into voting on it?
I'm very confident. We had 7 in support at the committee level. There's 8 needed to pass the bill, and I feel confident that I have the 8 necessary to pass it. And again, we'll be co-sponsoring the introduction of the task force on Tuesday with Chairman of the Public Safety Committee, Councilmember Conway.
You say that you don't want Baltimore police using this. As you mentioned, this bill doesn't actually control that, but the city is hopefully about to get local control back. Is that something you'll pursue, limiting the police department's use of it if local control becomes a reality?
I mean, that would, to be transparent, that would be my intention. Obviously, this is a legislative body, so we'd have to work with my colleagues to figure out what actually makes sense. But I do, personally, I do have concerns about the law enforcement use of it, given what we've seen nationally. And again, the action that is being taken in other states, in other counties, in other countries. There is a global movement to raise concerns about this. And I'm actually very confident that Congress may take action very soon as well. There's a bill being introduced into Congress to also prohibit this at the national level and or pass a regulatory framework, because right now it's the wild, wild west. It's being proliferated, it's being used across the country, across the globe, with no real oversight or accountability.
Do you have an indication whether that Maryland Image Repository is gathering images from private businesses like we do here in Baltimore?
They are. Right now? They are, yes. That is being used. They also use sketches There is no regulation around, like, and literally, like, face sketches are being uploaded into the system. There's a good article called Garbage In, Garbage Out. It was analysis done by Georgetown University that showed that a number of law enforcement agencies that use this technology aren't even using images all the time. Sometimes they're just using sketches that they then use to try and match people with, which is even more of an issue that when we started to dig into, realized that that's even more of a problem than we originally thought. There's also no regulatory framework around the quality of the images that are being shared from private industry into government databases. And so, you know, anybody can have a camera, and that the resolution of that camera can be to any degree. And so if you have a poorly resolution photo that's also being put into a database that is then being used to identify someone, it isn't particularly surprising that you may get it wrong a lot of time. And then there's also, Ralik mentioned the algorithmic bias that exists, and that's at a global scale, where the technology just struggles to identify black and brown faces, transgender individuals, people who have physical disabilities. There's actually a lawsuit right now against companies that do test proctoring, because they're people who have disabilities that the system just cannot recognize effectively, and they're failing classes. And so this technology is being proliferated in a number of different settings without any real oversight, and these questions are remaining at every single step, every single level.
Recently, Baltimore City, we have a pretty recent history of technology and policing being problematic. Could you just talk a little bit about that, and how does this task force aim to prevent further infringement?
Yeah, so a couple of the things that we know are issue or could be issues. There's the technology is being developed to be able to use this in body cameras and CCTV and license plate readers and Stingray. Yes. And so one of the things that we know for sure is that there have been a lot of issues with the tech that we already have, and then expanding that into other arenas, again, without that level of oversight and insurance that it is accurate. But then the other side of it is just the existence, right? So if we're talking about using it in a body camera, for example, you may call the police because you're experienced domestic violence or some other, you are the victim of the crime. As that officer shows up, now you are now being identified and put into a database where you have not committed a crime. You are not the suspect. But now here you are in a system that may or may not come back for you later. In an erroneous way. And so there's just the overall, not so much like, can the technology do it, but is this the type of thing that we should be doing? Obviously, we understand that there's CCTVs everywhere in the city of Baltimore and across the country. But this in a lot of ways would amount to a virtual stop and frisk, because the CCTV may see you just as a person walking down the street. Now they have the capability of knowing who you are and what you're wearing and who you're with and what time you were there. And I think the question remains as a moral question, an ethical question. Is that the right thing to do? Should people just be able to walk down the street, walk to the harbor, walk through their neighborhood, wherever they are in the city of Baltimore, and just be able to do that without worrying that they are now being surveilled and their movements being tracked by the government? I think that's the question that we also hope to come out of the task force as well. Is this the ethical thing to do in Baltimore? Yeah, spy plane has been controversial as well. And so, again, when we talk about technology, obviously, again, not trying to discount the need to make the city more safe, but what you've heard today is that we believe that safer neighborhoods are resourceful neighborhoods that have strong schools, strong communities, safe housing, safe streets, and there's a number of ways that we can do that. And it's not a coincidence that we're here doing Budget Week having these exact same conversations around where should our money actually be going to make the city safer. How do we reimagine public safety in a way that is improving people's lives, which we know that communities that have resources are also safer, right? They're not necessarily more surveilled. They also just have more to support their citizens, whether those are stronger schools or stronger neighborhoods, safe housing. And that's what we're trying to get at ultimately with this conversation around this bill, as well as conversations that we're having inside City Hall around the budget. Cool. All right, y'all. Thank you. Thank you to everybody who came out today. And hopefully we'll have a successful vote on Tuesday.
that like if you guys would have emailed me, I would have said leave it back.
What's that?
And not to say, hey, look, grab it.
Yep.
Yeah, exactly. So like today.